Wildcat kitten in danger. Hyenas lurking. Who will arrive first? If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment telling us where you're listening from. Wildlife photographer Jake Morrison had been tracking the serval mother for 3 weeks in the Serengeti, documenting her hunting techniques for a Nature magazine assignment. Servals, those stunning medium-sized wildcats with their spotted coats and enormous ears, were notoriously difficult to photograph in the wild. But this particular female had become somewhat habituated to Jake's presence, allowing him to capture remarkable footage of her life with her 2 young kittens. On this particular morning, Jake was positioned in his hide about 50 meters from the termite mound where the serval had established her den. He'd watched through his telephoto lens as the mother left at dawn to hunt, leaving her kittens safely tucked in the den's entrance. This was normal behavior. She'd typically return within 2 hours with prey to feed her young, but 3 hours passed, then 4. Jake began to feel uneasy. The kittens, about 8 weeks old, had emerged from the den and were playing near the entrance, their spotted coats camouflaging them against the grass, but their high-pitched mews carrying across the savannah. They were calling for their mother, increasingly distressed by her absence. Jake scanned the landscape with his binoculars, searching for the mother serval. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. About 200 meters away, partially hidden in tall grass, was a clan of spotted hyenas. 4 adults, their distinctive sloping backs and powerful jaws unmistakable even at this distance. And they were moving slowly, deliberately, toward the termite mound. Hyenas were opportunistic predators and scavengers, and while they typically hunted larger prey, they wouldn't pass up an easy meal like undefended kittens. Jake had documented enough predator behavior to know exactly what was about to happen. Those kittens had perhaps 10 minutes, maybe 15 if they were lucky, and stayed hidden before the hyenas reached them. Jake grabbed his radio to call his research partner, Dr. Amelia Chen, who was documenting lion behavior about 5 kilometers away. "Amelia, I've got a situation. Serval kittens, no mother, hyenas approaching. What's the protocol here?" Amelia's voice crackled back immediately. "You know the protocol, Jake. No interference. We're observers, not participants. It's harsh, but that's nature." "They're babies," Jake said, knowing even as he spoke that his emotional response wasn't scientifically valid. 8 weeks old. They don't even know to run yet. And if you intervene, you might save them today only to have them die tomorrow from starvation because their mother's been killed. Or you might habituate them to humans, making them vulnerable to poachers. Jake, you know this. We've had this conversation before. Jake did know this. He'd been a wildlife photographer and researcher for 15 years. He'd watched countless deaths, documented the brutal reality of predator and prey, understood that human interference usually caused more harm than good in the long run. But understanding intellectually and accepting emotionally were 2 different things, especially when he was watching through his viewfinder as 2 tiny, helpless creatures played innocently, unaware of the death approaching them. The hyenas were 150 meters away now, moving faster. They'd caught the scent or sound of the kittens and were beginning to close in with purpose. The kittens, still mewing plaintively for their mother, had ventured further from the den entrance, making themselves even more visible and vulnerable. Jake made a decision that he knew violated every principle of wildlife research ethics. He stood up from his hide, grabbed an air horn he kept for emergencies, and ran toward the termite mound, shouting and blasting the horn. The effect was immediate. The hyenas stopped, startled by the sudden appearance and noise. The kittens, equally startled, bolted for the den entrance and disappeared inside. Jake positioned himself between the den and the hyenas, continuing to make noise, making himself as large and threatening as possible. The hyenas, faced with a loud, aggressive human, made the practical decision that the meal wasn't worth the confrontation. They turned and loped away, their distinctive laughing calls echoing across the savannah, probably complaining about the interference. Jake's radio erupted with Amelia's voice. "Jake, what the hell did you just do? Please tell me you didn't just interfere with a predation event." "I interfered," Jake confirmed, his heart still pounding. "I know it was wrong by research standards, but Amelia, I couldn't watch it happen. Not this time." There was a long silence before Amelia responded. "You just compromised your objectivity, possibly your entire research project. The ethics committee is going to have questions, and Jake, where's the mother? If she's dead, those kittens are going to starve anyway. You haven't saved them, you've just postponed the inevitable." That thought had been haunting Jake even as he'd run toward the den, but before he could respond, movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. The mother serval was approaching, moving fast and low through the grass. She'd been hunting further away than usual, and now she was returning to find a human standing near her den and her kittens, distress calls echoing from inside. The serval froze about 20 meters away, her body low to the ground, her enormous ears swiveling toward Jake, assessing the threat level. Her mouth was empty, no prey, which meant her hunt had been unsuccessful. She was likely already stressed and hungry, and now she was returning to find a human near her vulnerable kittens. Jake slowly backed away, keeping his movements calm and predictable, talking softly. "I'm not a threat. I'm leaving. Your babies are safe. The hyenas are gone. I'm leaving now." The serval didn't move, didn't relax her tense posture. She was caught between maternal instinct driving her toward her kittens and survival instinct telling her to avoid the large predator, which was how she perceived Jake, standing near her den. Jake continued backing away, putting distance between himself and the termite mound. At 30 meters, the serval finally moved. She darted forward with incredible speed, reaching the den entrance in seconds. Her distinctive chirping call brought the kittens out immediately, and they swarmed over her, mewing and nuzzling, clearly relieved by her return. Jake retreated to his hide, his camera forgotten, watching as the serval checked over her kittens, licking them, reassuring them. After several minutes, she led them back into the den, disappearing from sight. Only then did Jake allow himself to breathe properly. "They're reunited," he told Amelia over the radio. "Mother's back. Kittens are safe, at least for now." "You got lucky," Amelia replied. "But Jake, we need to talk about this. You can't let emotions drive fieldwork decisions. Next time you might not get lucky. The mother might abandon the den because of human scent. The kittens might become habituated and approach other humans who aren't as benevolent. There are consequences to interference that you can't predict or control." Jake knew she was right. That evening, back at their research camp, he filed an incident report documenting his intervention and the ethical violation it represented. He fully expected to be removed from the project, possibly even blacklisted from future wildlife research. But Dr. Patricia Ndlovu, the project director who'd been conducting her own research in a different section of the Serengeti, had a different response when she read his report. She called both Jake and Amelia to a meeting the next morning. "I'm not going to reprimand you," she told Jake, though her expression was serious. "Not because what you did was right by research standards. It wasn't, but because you've highlighted something we've been grappling with in wildlife research ethics for decades. When does observation become complicity? When does our commitment to non-interference cause more harm than intervention would?" She pulled up data on her laptop, showing them research from multiple studies. "There's growing evidence that in certain circumstances, limited intervention can actually benefit conservation outcomes. We're not talking about regular interference, but strategic actions in specific situations that help maintain genetic diversity, protect keystone individuals, or prevent human-caused mortality. But hyena predation isn't human-caused, Amelia pointed out. It's natural predator behavior. True, Patricia agreed, but consider the context. Serval populations in this region have declined 30% in the last decade due to habitat fragmentation, vehicle strikes, and persecution by farmers. Every breeding female matters now in ways they didn't 20 years ago. Those kittens represent genetic diversity that might be critical for the population's long-term survival. She turned to Jake. What you did was impulsive and violated protocols, but it's also forced me to reconsider our blanket non-interference policy. I'm not saying we should regularly intervene in predation events. That would be ecological chaos. But maybe we need more nuanced guidelines that account for conservation status, population dynamics, and the specific circumstances of each situation. Over the following week, Jake continued monitoring the serval family from a greater distance, trying to minimize his impact. The mother successfully hunted and fed her kittens. They continued to thrive, growing more coordinated and adventurous. Jake documented everything, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. It was Amelia who noticed the pattern first. "Jake, look at this," she said, reviewing camera trap footage from around the territory. "The hyena clan that approached the den, they're not moving through this area anymore. They've shifted their range about 2 kilometers south." "Because of my interference?" Jake asked. "Possibly. Hyenas are intelligent and adaptable. They learn from experience. If they associate this area with aggressive human presence, they might avoid it, which means," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "your intervention might have created a temporary safety buffer for the serval family, but nature, as always, had other plans." 2 weeks after the hyena incident, Jake witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he understood about wildlife behavior. The mother serval was hunting, had caught a large rodent, and was returning to her den when she encountered the same hyena clan that had threatened her kittens. Jake expected her to flee, to abandon her prey and run. Servals were not fighters. They were built for speed and agility, not combat. A single hyena could kill an adult serval with ease, let alone a clan of 4. But instead of running, the serval did something remarkable. She put down her prey and began to vocalize, not the usual serval chirps or hisses, but a series of sounds Jake had never heard from the species before. The hyenas, who had been approaching the serval with clear predatory intent, stopped. Their body language shifted from aggressive to curious. The lead female, identifiable by a distinctive notch in her ear, took a step closer to the serval, who held her ground, continuing her unusual vocalizations. Jake was filming everything, his heart racing. This was unprecedented behavior. Servals and hyenas didn't interact like this. This wasn't predator-prey dynamics he was witnessing. This was something else entirely. Then the serval did something even more extraordinary. She picked up her catch, the rodent she'd killed, and tossed it toward the hyenas. It landed about 3 meters in front of the notch-eared female. The serval backed away slowly, still vocalizing, her body language clearly communicating that this was an offering, not a challenge. The lead hyena sniffed the rodent, then picked it up. The other hyenas crowded around, interested in the prize. While they were distracted, the serval turned and sprinted back toward her den, disappearing into the grass. The hyenas, satisfied with their easily acquired meal, didn't pursue. "Did that just happen?" Jake breathed into his radio. "Did that serval just pay off the hyenas to leave her alone?" Amelia, who'd been watching through her own telephoto lens from her position, sounded equally stunned. "That's exactly what it looked like." Jake Art, in 15 years of field research, I've never seen a small felid engage in what appears to be deliberate resource sharing with a predator species. This is, she paused, searching for words, this is behavior that suggests cognitive capabilities we haven't documented in servals before, Doctor. And Lovu was even more excited when they reported the incident that evening. Do you understand what you might have captured? That Serval demonstrated problem-solving, future planning, and what appears to be rudimentary negotiation with a predator. If we can document this behavior consistently, if we can show it's not a one-time anomaly, this could change our understanding of small, felid cognition. Over the next month, Jake documented 3 more instances of the serval deliberately offering prey to hyenas. Each time, the pattern was similar. The serval would encounter the hyena clan, vocalize in her distinctive way, offer her catch, and retreat while the hyenas were distracted. It was a consistent strategy, a learned behavior that the serval was actively employing to protect herself, and, by extension, her kittens. She's adapted, Amelia explained during one of their analysis sessions. The hyenas represent the primary threat to her offspring. She can't fight them and she can't always outrun them, so she's developed a strategy to manage the threat through resource sharing. It's brilliant, really. She sacrifices one meal to prevent potentially losing her kittens, but the most remarkable development came 6 weeks after Jake's initial intervention. Jake was monitoring the serval den when he noticed unusual activity. The mother serval was bringing prey back more frequently than normal, but she wasn't eating it herself or feeding it exclusively to her kittens. She was caching some of that evening. The notch-eared hyena appeared alone, approaching the den area with a casualness that suggested familiarity rather than hunting intent. The serval, instead of fleeing or hiding her kittens, emerged from the den and chirped in greeting. The hyena responded with her own vocalization, then moved to the cached prey and took one of the stored rodents. Jake watched in amazement as the hyena ate her prize, while the serval and her kittens observed from about 10 meters away. When the hyena finished, she didn't approach the cats. Instead, she settled down in a patch of shade about 20 meters from the den and appeared to go to sleep. "Amelia," Jake whispered into his radio, "I think the serval just hired a bodyguard." Over the following weeks, the pattern became clear. The serval regularly cached prey near her den, and the notch-eared hyena regularly visited to collect her payment. In return, the hyena's presence near the den deterred other predators, including members of her own clan. The arrangement was mutually beneficial. The hyena got easy meals without the energy expenditure of hunting, and the serval's kittens gained protection from one of their primary predators. "This is symbiosis," Dr. Ndlovu said when Jake presented his compiled footage and data, or at least something approaching it. "We see this kind of arrangement in some bird species, in certain primate groups, but documented cases of interspecies cooperation between a small felid and a large carnivore, particularly between predator and prey species, this is unprecedented." News of Jake's documentation spread through the wildlife research community. Scientists from institutions around the world requested access to his footage and data. The journal Nature requested a paper. Documentary producers wanted to create a film about the remarkable serval and her hyena protector. But for Jake, the most satisfying moment came 12 weeks after his initial intervention. The serval kittens, now nearly 20 weeks old and approaching independence, were playing near the den entrance. The notch-eared hyena was resting nearby, her role as guardian clearly established. The mother serval was hunting, confident that her offspring were protected not just by their hiding place, but by their unlikely protector. "You saved those kittens," Amelia admitted to Jake during one of their observation sessions, "not just by scaring off the hyenas that day, but by creating the circumstances that led to this arrangement. If you hadn't intervened, the mother might never have encountered those specific hyenas again in a non-predatory context. She might never have developed this strategy. Or," Jake countered, "I interfered with natural selection and created an artificial situation that wouldn't exist without human presence. That's the question that keeps me up at night, Amelia. Did I help, or did I harm? Will those kittens grow up dependent on arrangements with predators that only exist in this specific location, with this specific hyena? What happens when they disperse and try to establish their own territories? Those questions gained urgency as the research project drew to a close. Jake's funding was ending, and he'd be leaving the Serengeti in 4 weeks. The serval kittens were nearly ready for independence, but the arrangement with the notch-eared hyena was still firmly in place. What would happen when Jake wasn't there to document and understand the situation? Dr. Ndlovu had an answer. She'd secured funding for a long-term monitoring project specifically focused on the serval family and their unusual relationship with the hyena. Camera traps would be positioned around the den and territory. A local research assistant would conduct weekly checks. The project would run for at least 2 years, documenting whether the arrangement persisted, whether the kittens learned and replicated their mother's strategies, and how the situation evolved over time. This could be the most important wildlife behavior study in decades, Patricia told Jake. If this arrangement is stable, if it can be taught and transmitted, we're looking at documented interspecies cooperation between traditional predator and prey. The implications for our understanding of animal cognition, social learning, and adaptive behavior are enormous. In Jake's final week, something happened that brought his ethical dilemma into sharp focus. A different hyena clan, not the one including the notch-eared female, discovered the serval den. 4 aggressive subadults, probably dispersing from their natal clan and looking to establish territory, approached the termite mound with obvious predatory intent. The mother serval tried her strategy, vocalizing and offering cached prey. But these hyenas didn't recognize her signals. They'd never encountered her before, never learned the arrangement. They ignored the offered prey and advanced on the den where the kittens were hiding. The notch-eared hyena, who'd been resting nearby, immediately responded. She charged the intruders, her vocalizations aggressive and territorial. What followed was a brief but intense confrontation. The notch-eared hyena was outnumbered, but fought with the ferocity of defending what she considered her territory, or perhaps her food source. The younger hyenas, faced with an unexpectedly aggressive opponent, eventually retreated, leaving the area to the established resident. Jake filmed the entire encounter, his hands shaking. The notch-eared hyena had actively defended the serval's kittens, had put herself at risk against multiple opponents to protect what had become, in effect, her investment. The arrangement had evolved beyond simple resource exchange. This was something approaching genuine partnership. "That's it," Amelia said, watching the footage with Jake. "That's the proof we needed. This isn't opportunistic food sharing. This is established mutualism. The hyena has incorporated the serval family into her own resource protection strategy. She's defending them the same way she'd defend a kill or her own den." When Jake's time in the Serengeti ended, he left with mixed feelings. The paper he co-authored with Amelia and Dr. Ndlovu was published in Nature to widespread acclaim. The documentary, based on his footage, won awards and brought international attention to serval conservation. His intervention, initially an ethical violation, had led to discoveries that expanded scientific understanding of animal cognition and interspecies relationships. But he also left with questions. Had he helped or interfered? Had he documented natural behavior or created artificial conditions that wouldn't exist without his presence? These questions followed him to his next assignment, his next project, his next encounter with the eternal dilemma of wildlife research: when to observe and when to act. 2 years later, Jake received an email from the local research assistant monitoring the serval territory. The mother serval had successfully raised both kittens to independence. One, a female, had dispersed to establish a territory 15 kilometers away. The other, a male, had remained in the area, establishing a territory that overlapped with his mother's range. The arrangement with the notch-eared hyena had persisted, though it had evolved. The mother serval now cached less food, as her offspring were independent and her energy needs were lower. The hyena visited less frequently, but still maintained the relationship, still responded if other hyenas threatened the territory. Most remarkably, the male offspring had begun establishing his own food-caching behavior, though not yet with hyenas. He'd been observed offering prey to a pair of jackals that frequented his territory, experimenting with the strategy his mother had taught him through example. It's cultural transmission, Doctor. And Lavu told Jake during a video call. The kitten learned not just to hunt, not just to avoid predators, but a specific strategy for managing predator relationships through resource sharing. He's adapting it to his own circumstances, his own territory, his own challenges. This is learned behavior being transmitted generationally, which is the definition of culture. The female offspring's fate was less certain. She'd established territory in an area with fewer hyenas, but more human activity. Camera traps showed her hunting successfully, avoiding human settlements, thriving. Whether she'd need to develop relationships with predators remained to be seen. 3 years after Jake's initial intervention, he returned to the Serengeti for a follow-up documentary. The mother serval was still alive, still in her original territory, now raising a new litter of kittens with a different male. And she was still maintaining her arrangement with the notch-eared hyena, now an elderly matriarch of her clan. Jake watched through his viewfinder as the serval and hyena interacted with the casual familiarity of old associates. The serval's new kittens played near the den entrance, while the hyena rested in the shade, a living guardian whose presence meant safety rather than danger. "You asked me once if you'd helped or harmed," Amelia reminded him as they sat in their hide, watching the scene. "I think we have our answer. You created the conditions for something remarkable to develop. Yes, it required human intervention. Yes, it might not have happened naturally, but the result is a documented case of interspecies cooperation that's expanded our understanding of animal cognition and adaptive behavior. And more practically, it's kept a breeding female serval and her offspring alive in an ecosystem where their population is declining. In conservation terms, that's success." Jake zoomed in on the kittens, these new lives playing in the shadow of an arrangement their mother had learned, that their older siblings were now experimenting with in their own territories. The notch-eared hyena yawned, showing her impressive teeth, then settled her head on her paws, content in her role. Perhaps there were no clear answers to the ethical questions Jake had wrestled with. Perhaps every intervention created ripples that were impossible to predict or control. But watching this unlikely family, predator and prey, choosing cooperation over conflict, he felt that some interventions, even imperfect ones, led to outcomes worth celebrating.